I want to provide some economic background for the impact of trade and globalization, in particular its impact on working Americans, and then talk a little bit about my views of what's going on in the Trump administration. I have a slightly different view than we've heard so far. I think I have an understanding for why the Trump administration has been pursuing the policies that it has. I'm deeply skeptical that it's actually going to achieve its end goals. I think the goals make a certain amount of sense, but I don't think they're likely to get us there, and I'll explain why. I want to talk a little bit about the effects of trade on the economy, and particularly on working people. That's what I'll do with the slides that I have here tonight, just to set the context. And I think the big point I want to make in this is that I think for many of you who've studied trade, perhaps taken Econ 1 or even international economics, there's a big emphasis on the gains from trade, how this makes the economy more efficient through taking advantage of comparative advantage. Well, there are two dirty little secrets about that theory. One, it doesn't really contribute all that much to the economy. Paul Krugman has estimated that if the Trump administration were to essentially eliminate virtually all trade, and by that he means reduce imports and exports by perhaps 70%, it would reduce GDP by perhaps 2%. It's a pretty small number, if you think about that. And trade it makes up maybe 25–30% of our economy, but that's all we get from it, from all of the controversy we hear about international trade. Now, the adjustment process will be much more difficult, since it does involve perhaps 25 or 30% of the economy. We'd have to move a lot of people around, but that's all it really amounts to. But the other dirty little secret about trade is that the gains are vastly exceeded by the amount of redistribution of income that trade results in. And what trade has done, especially over the last 30 to 40 years, is cause a big increase, a big shift in income from the people who are, from working people, essentially, those without a college degree, to those who have college degrees, and especially to those who have advanced degrees in the economy. And that's what the slides I'm going to walk through will show you. And this is entirely predictable in trade theory. In the global economy, workers without a college degree are in excess supply, so it's going to, as we trade more, it pushes their wages down. People with college degrees and more skills are scarce, and so trading more pushes their wages up, and that's exactly what we've seen. On top of that, globalization has caused a tremendous increase in corporate profits, and that's contributed to the increase in wealth of those at the top. And so I just want to take you through a few slides, pardon me, we'll see if this goes. The first one here shows that, in my view, trade is responsible for the loss of manufacturing jobs. This is one of the costs of trade. The dark blue line here is our manufacturing trade deficit. It's now up, today it's over $800 billion, and since about 1997 this deficit has soared, and as a result we've lost about 5 million manufacturing jobs. It's about 30% of the people who work in manufacturing. Manufacturing is important because for people without college degrees, it provides good wages with good benefits. Now, and by the way, people without college degrees make up about 70% of the economy. They don't happen to be concentrated here in places like Washington, D.C. or New York. They live, for the most part, in the 2,500 counties that didn't vote for Hillary Clinton, not in the coast. So I think this is important politically as well. What's happened to the incomes of these non-college educated workers? This graph shows you what's happened to productivity, output per worker, in the blue line, and to the income of a typical worker. By typical worker, I mean somebody, again, who does not have a college degree. For the first 2 or 3 decades of the post-war period, productivity and wages rose together from about 1960 to about somewhere in the 1970s, 73, 79, those are the break points. This one puts it at 79. Since then, hourly compensation, that's wages and benefits, for people without college degrees has been essentially flat. It's gone up 14%, while productivity has increased by a factor of 250%. That income is going somewhere. It's not going to people who produce the stuff in our economy. Why is this? Well, this chart's a little too complicated, but the bottom line is, again, productivity is the dark blue line. Since '79, that's increased 72%. Hourly wages and real mean hourly compensation has only increased 8%. That's just wages. Most of that's because of an increase in inequality. That's this block here. Again, this is pretty sophisticated economics. I can present it a little more simply. The next slide. This shows you what's happened to wages by level of education. I think this is perhaps the most telling one. Wages for people with less than a high school degree, with a high school degree, over the last 30 years have been flat. They've seen no gain in income at all. All of the gains of income have gone to people with a college degree, and particularly to those with advanced degree. That's those of you, for the most part, sitting here. So we benefited. People out in the rest of the country who don't have college degrees have not. It's even more extreme if you look at the changes in real and average wages at the very top of the income distribution. This breaks out the top 10% and the rest of the economy. Those in the top 1% have seen their income go up by 148% since 1980. Those at the 95th percentile, 67%. These are in real dollar terms. Those at the 90th percentile, 43%. Everybody else in the 90th and below has seen wages increase 21%, and most of that's gone to people between the 70th and the 90th, the college degrees, but not the advanced degrees. So again, people at the bottom are just not seeing the benefits. And that's the end. We can stop there. That's the references you can look at later if you like. Now, what does this mean for trade policy? We can talk about it a bit. I want to make just a couple of points. In my view, trade policy for the past 3 decades has been about much more than reducing tariffs. It's been about creating a set of rules that would make global trade safe for multinational companies. And that's what we have in fact done. These rules, starting with NAFTA, there were a few agreements before that, but NAFTA was really the first major such agreement, created a set of institutions, a set of rules across a number of industries that encourage firms to outsource production. And that's what we've seen. We've seen in manufacturing alone, we've lost about 85,000 to 90,000 plants that have moved abroad. We've lost these 5 million jobs I talked about earlier. And it's those rules, I think, that are part of the problem. And frankly, I don't think that renegotiating those treaties is a solution, in part because of who is at the table. If you look at the trade advisors who advise the president, he's going to release his new NAFTA agreement or U.S.-Mexico agreement this week or next. There are 500 advisors. About 495 of those are corporate lobbyists, and that's who writes the rules. They're in the room when the agreements are negotiated. So I don't think renegotiating NAFTA is going to accomplish much, and frankly, NAFTA is a small part of our trade problem. The biggest part of our trade problem in the United States is China trade. It's the #1 source of both global trade imbalances and our trade deficits. #2, Europe, and particularly Germany and the Netherlands and a few other what they call greater, well, some wags are referred to as Greater Germania. It's the other Germanic states in the north of Europe have very large trade surpluses. And the third is Japan. And at the root of these are, in my view, currency imbalances, which we can talk about a bit later. And this is, I think, part of the problem with what Trump is doing. He likes to impose tariffs. He likes to fight with countries one-on-one. He likes to complain about bilateral trade flows, whereas in fact what we have is an imbalanced world trading, set of world trading patterns. It's not just the US that suffers, other countries, the UK, Brazil, India suffer. I don't think his tariffs are likely to achieve his intended result of bringing down the US trade deficit. In fact, I think if you look at his policies in total, they're likely to make the trade deficit worse. And I think part of the reason for that is that he doesn't have a strategy for what he wants to achieve in these, by imposing these tariffs. There's nothing, it's not clear what he can get out of the battles that he has put in place. I don't think they're likely to reduce the trade deficits for at least this, and I'm focusing here specifically on China. We've heard about the China tariffs. They're imposed now on $250 billion in goods as of this week. Could be another 250 very soon. The tariffs could go as high as 25%. But even if he applies them to all imports from China, and even to all automobile imports, that would still only amount to about 1/3 of total imports. So that's not going to bring down our total import bill. It's just going to suppress perhaps 1/3 of it. Other countries are retaliating. So that, as we know, that's going to put downward pressure on our exports. So that's not going to help our trade balance. And then China has responded by playing what I view it as its ace in the hole. China has allowed its currency to begin to fall. Chinese currency has fallen about 9% since March of this year. What does that do? That pushes down the price of its exports, offsetting the effect of the Trump tariffs. So it will make it easier for Chinese exporters to compensate, and in fact, their exports, not just to the US, but to the rest of the world, will go up. And so that will offset the effect of any tariffs on US-China trade. And most importantly, I think, Trump's other policies, his tax cuts, which are going to, and his spending increases, are going to tremendously increase the deficit. We've already seen that that's putting upward pressure on interest rates. The dollar is rising steadily. The dollar is up about 19% in the last 3 years, and that's going to make, both of those are going to make the trade deficit bigger. So for all of those reasons, I don't think we're likely to see an improvement in our trade balance, which, going back to my first slide, what I think we need to begin to rebuild manufacturing. Trump says he wants to do. The policies aren't going to get us there. What should we do instead? In my view, we've had large trade imbalances in the past, and the way we've responded to them on 2 occasions is by engaging in a major rebalancing of the value of our currency. The most recent occasion was in 1985. Congress in that case threatened to put tariffs not just on a few products or a few countries, but on everything we imported from most of the world. On Japan, on Germany, Brazil. This got those countries concerned. They came to the US, they came to James Baker, Ronald Reagan's Treasury Secretary, and they worked out a deal to reduce the value of the US dollar by about 30%. That made US exports more competitive. It reduced the rate of growth of imports, and our trade balance went away within about 4 years. Nixon did the same thing in 1971. He had a foreign exchange crisis. Our trade deficit was growing at the time by tiny amounts compared to today, but for him it was a crisis. He imposed an import surcharge. He did it in August. By December, he had negotiated an end to the system of fixed exchange rates, and the rest is history. Since then, we've had flexible exchange rates. It worked okay for a while, but periodically, exchange rates got out of alignment, and they had to be realigned, and I think we're at that point today. So I'll stop there. We can talk about any of this stuff and NAFTA, or whatever interests you in the Q&A. Thank you.
So let's